Check. There we go. Vocal mic. And yeah, switch back on. There we go.
Same thing I had concerns of before. The bass is just so low. And we're also blasting the stream. The guitar and the vocals are good. Why is bass so low?
Play the bass. It's pretty loud in my ears.
Not. Yeah, for some, I don't know what, if anything.
Maybe
was
it's
touched.
just in your mix or something. Hold on.
No, like now it sounds fine. I don't know if just touching the knob on the Mosrite kind of did something. I mean, I am maxed out, but. But either way, the stream is all red.
It's going to spike red as long as we have one of the vocal mics on and I'm playing the drums. Like, that's pretty much always going to happen.
I mean, try without, I guess. How's the beer looking? And double IPA or sour next?
Let's go with the double IPA
Cool.
and then finish off with the sour. Turns out now you can actually mark your Twitch stream as consuming drugs and or alcohol.
I keep laughing because it keeps not logging me in when I try to attend your stream at first. And the other thing is excessive cigarette smoking. Not regular cigarette smoking. Excessive. Has to be excessive.
Yeah. Excessive cigarette smoking. Like one is okay.
Yeah,
For show.
one every once in a while. But if someone's just sitting there chatting in their garage or something,
I'm gonna stop this metronome because that's gonna drive me crazy.
Yeah, I can maybe do it faster. Nope, you got it.
Haha.
Exactly. Someone who's just sitting there like lighting butt to butt, keep continuing
Right.
the one cigarette drag.
Right.
So we got here is Monson 10th Anniversary Treehouse Brew Double IPA. Gotta love anniversaries. Yours here.
What? You want the pipe? Okay.
Yes.
I was confused. I was like, what do you want from me?
Oh God. I've been gum.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I forgot to warn you about that. It kind of like, it's a downside of that pipe. It kind of like builds up the goop over time at the end of it. You gotta kind of learn to like, halt, you know,
just like ash or
don't touch your lips to the middle of it. Yeah, perfectly. Yeah. Like gum it up a little bit higher.
I touched it. It was like there's a string. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Tasted good though.
Yeah. That is a nice cart I've got in there. I think it's like strawberry watermelon or something or other. Did it work for you? Yeah. There's like, it gets clogged up just like any of the other vapes, you know?
It tastes like melon, which is really nice.
But yeah, it gets clogged up like just like any of the other vapes, and it's actually a little bit even more confusing because there's two stages of clogging. There's clogging like within
Inner and outer, yeah.
Yeah, like within the vape cart itself, and then within the tube that goes up to your mouth. So like you have to like clear out the clog at the end of the tube first, and make sure that doesn't touch your tongue. There's a skill to use it.
You need
Clearly.
to just constantly have a hairpin around. Just give it the little swirl.
Yeah, or like alcohol wipes. You know?
Yeah.
This is another treehouse. Live well. Monson 10th anniversary. Munson. Munson is a town in Massachusetts, right? Yeah. I had a friend that lived there.
Yeah, that's where they moved their brewery to, I think. Or
Yeah, I had a friend growing up that lived there. What follows is an attempt to distill what should be a book into a short story on the side of a beer can. It's impossible to believe it's been a decade since we first stepped foot in the green building big green building in Munson. Those first years were a series of juxtapositions, utterly exhausting days and nights paired with unbound creativity and originality. We ruthlessly refined a wholly original core beer character that remains as enigmatic as ever. Looking back, we have mixed feelings. From the outside, it was an exciting and memorable time. On On the inside, the pressure of keeping up with an utterly unrivaled demand just about killed us. The lessons we learned and our unspeakable sacrifices left us with profound scar tissue that we're still working to honor. A truly seismic energy that still reverberates as we work to make each day better than the last. Standing on a septic system, terrible water quality, cumbersome equipment, no technology, no draft beer, parking in a muddy field, impossible to get beer. Quite literally nothing was better in Munson except for the lessons it taught us, the lifelong energy it instilled in us, and the idea that community is at the core of the human experience. It taught us that with relentless, consistent dedication to your craft and genuine sacrifice, you can leave your mark in the universe. I didn't expect it to be that epic, but as I kept reading it, it kept getting more and more epic.
It's appropriate for the song. Like, damn, half of that could be turned into lyrics.
It could be. It's sad that the person who wrote that will never get to hear what just happened.
Can't be it then.
What's going on?
Try to find tap tempo.
Yeah, that's tap
Now
tempo.
it is. Yeah, it just wasn't responding correctly.
Yeah, you really got to kind of stomp on those pedals, and with it kind of cockeyed like that, it's not. Yeah.
That's why I might have been wobbling a little bit. Once it's like this, it should be fine.
Yeah, it just needs to be stable.
You need a hold.
In the past, it's been helpful if we just like jam something out without the metronome first, and then just figure out what we're gonna do, and then you record the loop. But in this case, if you've got something in mind, just go ahead.
Yeah. I know the tempo, it just like keeps triggering slower than I'm trying. See what I mean? It's not changing.
You have to hit 4 beats in order for it to change.
See, it like changed at the last second.
Try it again.
So I'm like much slower.
It's interesting because I'm seeing it light up the tap logo. Here, you start playing and I'll tap it out. Just try and play along to that. Pretty close. What happened?
My first 2 beats of the repetition disappeared, so it just it was gone. It was off timed.
Quantization is on 1 bar.
Are we on 4/4?
Yep, we're on 4/4.
Because I know that was a mistake last time because I wrote something weird at the end of the session.
Yeah, no, we're in 4/4. 1 bar. You should just do a short test just to make sure everything is right. Like a short 2-bar loop or whatever. And you can focus the guitar if you want. There you go.
I fucked that up so much, but I'm gonna let it slide. At least the floor feels a lot more balanced now when I'm wobbling around to trying to hit things.
Right. Much more comfy for your feet.
Yeah, you can actually sink into it a little instead of like hard tile and be like, whoa, I'm sliding.
Yeah. You hit it after the one, just slightly. We can maybe work with that though. You just gotta remember there's a whole measure after the end of the. Switch focus between like the vocals and the bass and the guitar. Weird. It's not either of the guitars. Where's that coming from?
I was kind of wondering that the whole time. I'm like, there's something getting in the way here. But now that I hear it, what the hell? Air handler on loop somehow.
Not sure what's going in there, but I gotta figure that out before I turn that up.
What is it?
Hold on. I was thinking the bass. Yeah, get rid of these.
I mean, it's not my bass line itself. The tuner's on, so the bass is not passing anything. All pedals off, too.
It's getting input. I mean, it's getting input from something.
Not I. But, are you looking at it?
Well, this is amplitude.
I mean, all my pedals are off, so it should be off. I was just going to unplug it if you were looking at it.
I'm looking at it now, yeah?
Do you see the active signal?
Yeah.
Gone or not?
There's stuff coming in, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not me.
That's weird.
Reboot the plugin? I don't know.
Hold on. Let's make that stop. It's time for an investigation. Investigation time. You haven't used your Ableton session in half a year. And there's a confusing signal.
2 beers left here. They're both PERT series.
I don't want to jinx it, but the computer hasn't crashed on us yet, which is a good sign.
Gushers and Fruit by the Foot or Sour Patch Kids?
What? Probably the Gushers first.
A little juicy.
Okay, so this channel is still making noise somehow. I'm going to bypass Amplitube. It stopped making noise.
Pineapple, plum,
I'm going
strawberry,
to re-enable
raspberry,
Amplitube. It
passion
stopped
fruit.
making noise. It was Amplitube the whole time. That's weird.
Yeah, called it.
Turning it back on. Yeah. That was weird, man. You have the bass on you?
No, it's over there.
Can you like just slap a note on it when you get a chance?
Slap at the bass.
Make sure it's still passing signal. That sounds like bass. Thank you.
Oh my god. What is this?
I should add that we are both like slightly intoxicated right now.
Didn't finish yours.
I'm very close. Very close.
Very close. I realize this is one we're gonna need help with. Because
What
I
do you
need
mean?
to like even it out a little.
Oh, okay. Yep. Got you.
So much gunk at the bottom, probably.
Flavies. Use the proper language.
Flavors.
Cheers.
This one is insane, I'll tell you.
What do we got here?
Pineapple, plum, strawberry, raspberry, passion fruit, gushers, and fruit by the foot. It's very berry, but like you definitely taste the candy. Like sometimes they say that stuff and it's just like, oh well, it just tastes like raspberry. This one I could probably taste the candy.
On the label, they have the trademark symbol next to the candies on each one, so you know it's legit. But it's sort of like so small that it's indiscernible. So I don't know, maybe not.
I personally taste the gushers more than anything.
Yeah, for sure. That flavor is absolutely there.
Whatever that juicy center was, if they took that and made it a little carbonated, it's kind of what it's like, to me at least.
Yeah. 100% agreed. It's delicious.
So good. Those pedals really hate each other. It's good and bad.
Something seems up with that analog signal there.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like, the pedal wasn't sounding right, and then I adjusted. Now it sounds right with noise.
You like smacked it, and then it's that pot. Yeah, it's that pot. Got a dirty pot.
Yeah, because I was pressing on the pedal, and like it sounds like almost nothing happened. But now I just don't want to play because it's so noisy.
It's quite noisy. I could give you a more distorted guitar
Well,
preset.
I got the other one, that's why.
Where-
Just a muddier sounding distortion. Op amp.
Oh, sorry.
Like,
I accidentally changed the
Shaking it.
amp model.
yeah, I was gonna say.
Uh,
Just went to noise.
There you go. That guitar is honestly kind of hard to get used to after playing a Fender for a while because the neck is so skinny. Your mic is still hot. Maybe not.
And of course, instantly forget my fingering. much louder with drums.
Yeah, I can play while you have the mic on. I just have to know that you're turning it on so I can tone it down. Can't be like grooving hard on the cymbals.
Yeah, exactly. Gave me more opportunities when we were doing that, when you had a stack of instruments back there too. It's too good. That's the raspberry I want. Even though it's everything, not just raspberry.
It's a lot of stuff, but raspberry really does kind of dominate the flavor.
I think everything else just adds to the cheek feel.
I was at a dinner recently at a restaurant where somebody had brought a birthday cake for somebody, and it was a carrot cake. And they gave it to the restaurant to serve, and they put down like a raspberry like sauce on the plate before serving the carrot cake, and added like whipped cream. And some people were like, "This doesn't work."
It sounds weird.
Yeah, it was a little weird, honestly.
Maybe they thought it was cheesecake, 'cause that would sound amazing.
Yeah, they maybe should have asked what kind of cake it was, but they should have known after they cut it, right?
Pretty much, because the color is pretty obvious.
It's pretty obvious that it's carrot cake once you cut it, yeah. They probably put it on the first plate and were like, well, we can't back out now.
We did all the plates first, and then we cut the cake.
Maybe.
Oh, boy. Then, you know, sometimes there's just weird things that do work.
This did not work.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it.
Carrots and raspberry.
I barely like carrots as is, and I just...
I mean, carrots are sweet.
Yeah, and raspberry or whatever is hyper sweet.
It's sweet, but it's also tart. Raspberry.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
Yeah.
There's a weird sweet funk I don't like in carrots.
You know, like with the sweet with carrots, I don't get down with raspberry, but with like, you know, carrot works with the way I was explaining it was carrot works with pumpkin pie spices, whereas like pumpkin pie is not like the flavor of pumpkin. It's like nutmeg.
It's a flower, cinnamon really.
Nutmeg and
Nutmeg and
cinnamon and allspice or something.
Yeah.
Whatever the pumpkin spices are. I'm not privy to the exact spices in pumpkin spice.
Yep. But yeah, nutmeg and cinnamon though.
Mostly, right? Yeah.
Or any holiday drink thing that you're trying to mimic is always just those things. Or Christmassy time holiday.
We've mostly had one viewer, which is probably my bot.
It definitely is.
At one point, it was 5 viewers. I don't know if that was like
More bots.
more bots scanning.
Well, we're
The
slow
stream
to-
looks good,
I
though.
was gonna say we're slow to get to it, but when we get to it, it's good.
Just that little bit of extra headroom lets me put the camera angle wide enough so that it can like catch any kind of upward movement.
This also looks like stage appropriate. Like some of the other ones we have, like I'm either gigantic or too small. It's like this feels like I'm in front of you and an appropriate size. I should only be a tiny bit bigger.
Yeah, it looks like a little bit like you're on a riser.
Exactly, because my legs are so...
Yeah, or you just have really long legs.
It's so much slower than what I did.
Tap it again. I'll watch.
Oh my god. Now my fingers are hurting from holding this.
You should just let me tap it in for now. We should figure it
Yeah,
out, because
you
that
can
might
hear
be
it's
some
like-
kind of glitch. I don't
It's
know.
going rapid fire exactly, and I'm like, if I can't do a persistent tap and get it, it's like every time I land, it's just a little bit slower.
Yeah, for now I'll tap it in. That seemed to work before. That's close, right? The tempo.
Close.
Is it too fast? Seems about right. Getting the hang of it again.
Yep, a little slower on the uptake, but eventually I get there.
Yeah, you got to be like in shape to do this too.
And yeah, that too. There's a physical aspect. Well, for you.
Yeah,
My physical.
partially for you too. I mean, standing up for a long time, and
I was literally just about to say that. My physical part of it has been halved because I'm standing on the soft stuff. Like,
yeah, but also like, your fingers are an acute.
oh,
thing,
sure enough, yeah.
Of course, like
I'm definitely
recording
slower
that-
than I've ever been, but
yeah, just recording that tapping riff earlier, like my fingers.
my fingies.
My fingies.
Yeah.
I'm old.
It's not even old. It's just I'm
No.
not playing, and I
Yeah.
should be. Because it's funny that you actually messaged me because I was thinking the same thing. I was just like, you know what? I like actually don't have anything planned for once this weekend, and like we should do music, and I haven't been recording, so I need to get back into the warm up of playing to want to record.
Right.
But I was thinking,
What better way to do that than to one viewer on Twitch.tv?
Exactly.
TV.
So, but no, I had the same thing. I was just like, ah, shit, we haven't done this in a while. Like, we've just been working on music and not actually jamming. Well, at my house, yes, but not here,
Right.
which has been pleasurable. But I was just like, shit, I haven't been to Carrie's in a while. Let's do that.
Yeah. There's a definite like mental overhead of like making sure the stream actually works. For sure, but like, once you get past that and get into a rhythm, it's not so bad.
Yeah, we've done it a million times over.
Like at one point, we had people drawing on the walls and shit.
That was great.
It was a good time.
Still all the fun shadowy stuff.
When I streamed drum requests the other day, I just did it with like a really simple Reaper project, and it was nice to think about. Because like loading this project, there's so much stuff in here,
It works differently.
It's just like the entire template, and
So as is tradition, I'm kind of done, which means I have at least one song left of me because I usually start something diddly and then it turns into a full blown thing. So we have one more beer, so I'll as well make it.
sounds about right.
And now we go raspberry, orange, apricot, guava, lemon, lime, pineapple, and Sour Patch Kids. I'm not going to lie, I don't want to influence your brain on this, but lemon lime is what I taste the most. And there are lemon lime Sour Patch Kids, but it makes me think they dumped
It's true.
mostly that in it.
Maybe.
Not
I saved this one for last because Sour Patch Kids, like out of the like.
It's the most drastic interrupting your taste, I can tell you that much.
True. I mean, out of the fruity candies or cereals that have been in these beers, Sour Patch Kids is the one where I was most like, oh, that could work really well. Let's see what we got here.
Usually when something's already sour, you're wrong. Like Warheads. Warheads are sour, but the sour taste is a little kicky in the nuts and not flavorful. That's how high I went. But
This is a.
check your limit. That's kind of what I'm at. Yeah. I think I have too much, if anything. Yeah, perfect. Because a lot of candies is less about the fruit flavoring and more about the sucker effect. And you want some sour taste, but not really too much a pull your cheeks in kind of sucker. So that's why the Warhead beer was kind of honestly bad. This is very good. But
Which one was the Warheads beer?
we didn't have it tonight.
I was gonna say I don't remember that, but it's possible that
I think I brought it over here like a year and a half ago or something like that.
I remember you saying there was a Warheads sour.
And it was the same. You had the same response as I did, where like you first drink off of that one, you're like, "Wow,
Holy shit, man.
Shit, that is. Ooh, I am puckered up."
Yeah. All right, let's see what this is.
It smells of Sour Patch Kids.
Yeah. Sour Patch Kids have that like, it's like almost like a salty exterior to them.
It's not, but yeah, I know what you mean exactly. It makes you like suck your tongue the same way.
It's like citric acid, like right on the exterior of the candy. So the sour hits you right up front.
Is it just me though, or is it very heavy lemon lime? Or is the raspberry and tangos and whatever the hell else coming through?
On the nose, it's like heavy lemon lime Sprite.
Right, that's what I think too.
Drinking it tastes like Sprite.
It gets some berry on the back end residuals. But up front, it's very lemon lime and Sour Patch Kid lemon lime.
To me, it tastes like Sprite mostly because Sour Patch Kids, like part of the experience of eating Sour Patch Kids is that they're gummy and you crunch on the citric acid on the outside.
Oh man.
But you don't really get that experience with this quite as much. But it's got that, it's got the same sour quality as Sour Patch Kids.
Exactly. Which the sour experience on those is very pleasant and rounded, versus the Warhead, like I said, is kind of, well, it's not designed for that. It's not designed to be pleasant. So when you add it to a beer, it does the same thing. We're like, well, it's great for if you liked Warheads. Anyone who doesn't like Warheads or experienced it will never even get close to understanding this beer. Because, ooh, boy. Make your eyes pop out of your skull.
Solid jam.
Indeed, indeed.
Forgot how hard it is to keep your posture over like a how long we've been live? 2 hours and 45 minutes stream.
Right.
When sitting down on a drum stool.
For that matter.
Also standing with a guitar
Or-
on your back.
I was gonna say performance-wise too. Remember, I'm just like constantly hunched over the guitar, like, "Hey, stand straighter. Sometimes look up."
Yeah.
Like sometimes I look and like you're like, yeah, it just looks like jamming, and other times it's like, "Yeah, my precious,
My precious. Yeah, some rusty jams all around, but I think, like, you know,
We got some good things in there.
good things.
I had my that was my outro. I can't leave any others.
Yeah. It's more of a pain in the ass over here to set up jamming and get the stream going and everything, but it's nice to have the videos to pull things out of.
Indeed, you need the full control so you can't, or don't keep walking back and forth.
What do you mean?
Or you said it's hard having the computer set up, but right? Or
I'm
yeah,
just
some
talking
shit.
about like jamming on the amps at your place versus
Yeah.
versus like doing the stream here. There's no one watching our stream, but if people are watching our stream, I would say my friend Chroma Studios here has a studio that we jam at sometimes with his amplifiers and drum kit, and we don't really stream it because it's kind of just like of a, you know, a spur of the moment thing usually.
I mean, the project's pretty much, or was, when we were on Digital Performer, just ready to go if we ever did want to stream. But then we usually drink, and then we're like, fuck it. Amp jams are just so fast and convenient. And then I walk away afterwards being like, we had such good things I wanted to record.
Right, and my setup here kind of forces you to
Yeah, there's
be-
no other choice.
yeah, to be in a spot where you're recording stuff.
I like the convenience, but yeah, exactly. The last time me, you, and Doug jammed, like, there was a lot of really good stuff there, I feel like,
For sure, yeah.
that I wish it was all recorded.
When I was playing bass, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah. It took us a second to get on the same page, and then when we did, just that's how it happens. Like, all right, we're all leading each other, like, with a little dangling carrot, but when we all sit down for a meal, it's like,
We got to chase the same carrot.
yeah, eventually we just, like, everything slowly works into itself, and it's like, oh, baby. Then it's
Yeah.
hard to move on from that riff because we're all so locked in.
Yeah. I found with the bass, I didn't really necessarily think of the trick of like when you get tired doing fingering to switch to the pick.
Mm-hmm.
And once I did that, it was like kind of game changing for my bass playing abilities.
Being able to switch between.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Especially
why you,
with that wooden pick. That wooden pick is nice.
the-
No, it wasn't necessarily
it's a
wooden.
felt.
Yeah, it was felt, but it felt like it had like a wooden core, kind of, or like a more sturdy core than just felt. on the
There's something
inside, I
that
would
feels
say.
very glued about it. Like
Yeah.
you're hitting the hard glue versus the other part is like all the slippery felt that you'd put under things that you put on wood. Like,
Anyway.
yeah, you have two different sounds off of that. But that was, I like because it maintains the thump. So obviously our last recording sounds, like I said, it's too aggressive pick sounding. It's like you get that aggressive pick sound without that very high end trebly, like
Yeah, because it's felt.
exactly. So it's still rounded.
Word.
But indeed.
And it helps your stamina.
But that's, yeah, you'll always find me with a pick in my pocket when I'm playing bass because exactly.
In emergencies when you're like, oh, I can't take it anymore.
Well, I mean, you've been
pick
on
is like
stage
your,
before. Maybe not. Well, you one time playing guitar. Maybe it's way different playing bass on stage. But like, yeah, you've obviously had those days where your like arm's just not as fast as it usually is, and
Yeah.
those days tend to be like halfway through a set when you're on stage because those lamps are burning you out. As if they're not LEDs, you're just getting heated up, and I'm like, oh my god, plus the stress of anything also just exhausts you faster.
Yeah.
And then I definitely found them where like the song is not played with a pick, but I'm gonna reach into my pocket and pull one out to get through this damn thing because
Yeah,
you saw like
because it's better than not being able to play it, you know?
yeah, you've seen the Cat Geo stuff. All of it's like really fast tempo
It is,
stuff.
yeah.
So it's like you're ripping through. It's like I can't play every other note. I need to pop a pick out and play all the notes.
Indeed.
Shreddy. Someone came to one of our shows and that was trying to befriend at first, but I guess we're just not a match. But like, but his band, the man, I'm forgetting right now. But afterwards, he's like, "So, what did you think of our band?" It was really fast. I didn't get a good or bad. That's all I got.
Really fast.
Yeah, I'm like, that's fair.
Cat Geo.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is pretty fast. A lot of the songs are.
Mm-hmm. It's really just the drummer moving along,
Right.
which that's how it works.
Yeah, that's what he does in the pop punk land.
Or even just you, like me and you. Like, if you go halftime, you change that vibe. Doesn't have to be, but yeah, exactly. You blast into that pop punk vibe. It's
Anyway, I think I shall end this stream.
probably. I ain't playing more. No more robot ears.
Yep. Do 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 do. Shut off the mic.
Never.